When I left the desert and put foot to the road leading to my village of Nazareth, I was still elated, exuberantly joyous in the knowledge so gloriously revealed to me in the desert. I focused my thoughts entirely on all that I had learned, and if my thoughts strayed to my former negative forms of thought, I swiftly turned to the Father for inspiration and determination in overcoming them. In this way, I returned constantly to the light of awareness and understanding. Some people looked at me askance, seeing my joy and also my dirty, unkempt appearance. Was I happy with drink, they wondered? Others looked at me with abhorrence. Instead of reacting with anger as in the past, I remembered that I had been blessed with visions and knowledge they could not even begin to imagine. I blessed them and prayed for their inner vision to be similarly opened and continued peacefully along the road to my home. There were villagers, however, who viewed my pitiful state with compassion and hurried into their houses to fetch me bread and even wine to help me on my way. There was always someone who offered shelter for the night. The Father Life indeed supplied all my needs and gave me protection as needed. All this time I said not a word about my weeks in the desert. I felt that the time was not yet ripe. Eventually I reached my hometown Nazareth, and the villagers openly scoffed, pointing at my filthy self and tattered clothes. Dirty, lazy layabout were some of the kinder words thrown at me. I came to my mother's door with a feeling of dread, since I knew she would be more shocked than her neighbors when she saw me stand in front of her. Thin, bones showing through skin, eyes sunken and cheeks hollowed out, face burned black, and lips blistered with the sun, and beard grown long and straggly. My clothes. She would be outraged when she saw my clothes, their original color wholly obscured by desert dust and the cloth torn and ragged. I mounted the steps and braced myself to endure the heat of my mother's fury. When I knocked, my sister came to the door. She looked at me, open-mouthed, wide-eyed and frightened, then slammed the door in my face. I could hear her running to the back of the house, screaming, "Mother, come quickly! There's a dirty old man at the door!" I could hear my mother muttering crossly to herself, hurrying to the door. Flinging it open, she stood, rooted in shock. I smiled, but for a moment she looked me up and down with increasing horror, as she realized this dreadful creature was indeed her wayward son, Jesus. I held out my hands to her, saying, "I know I cause you much pain, but can you help me?" Immediately her expression changed, and drawing me inside, she secured the door. "Quick," she said to my frightened sister, "stop that noise and put water on to boil. Your brother is starved. It doesn't matter what trouble he has got into. He belongs to us. He must be looked after." Gently, she helped me take off my clothes and bent me over a large container of water and scrubbed me clean. She washed and trimmed my hair and beard and lightly covered the sores on my body and lips with a healing salve. Neither of us broke the silence. I savored the love she showed me and tried to show my gratitude by a more gentle and sensitive approach. Having helped me put on a clean robe, she sat me down to a frugal meal of bread, milk, and honey. Reluctantly, she gave me wine to pick up my strength, but it was obvious she thought that wine had been the cause of my shocking plight. Then she led me to a bed and placed a cover over me. I slept for several hours and woke refreshed to a morning, bright with sunshine seen through the window. I was now longing to talk to my mother, to tell her that I was indeed a Messiah, but not the kind the Jews imagined. I could save people from the bad results of their sins. I could help them find health, abundance, fulfillment of their needs, because I could now teach them exactly how the world had been created. As I tried to tell her, she started off by being excited and delighted. She jumped to her feet and wanted to rush out to tell the neighbors her son was indeed the Messiah. They should hear how nicely he now talked, and he had been fasting in the desert. But I stopped her from doing this. I said that I had not yet told her what had been revealed to me. One of the most important things I had learned was that the Orthodox Jews were entirely wrong in their belief in an avenging God. There was no such thing. This frightened and upset her, and she exclaimed, How then will Jehovah govern the world and make us good and listen to his prophets if he does not punish us? Are you now so big that you're going to tell the high priests their own business handed down to them from the time of Moses? Are you going to bring more shame on this house?" She began to cry, saying with anger, "You've not changed a bit. You've only changed in what you are saying. You have brought me nothing but grief. How could I ever believe that you would be a Messiah? You will only lead people into greater torment than ever before with your strange ideas." My brothers heard her wailing and came running, wanting to turn me out of the house. Because I did not want a disturbance, I offered to leave peacefully. If this was how my mother reacted, I could be sure that everyone else would react in the same way to what I wanted to tell them. I realized I needed a quiet time of absolute rest and silence in which to collect all my thoughts and experiences together. I would have to pray for inspired guidance on how best to approach the Jews with my message of good news. I was sure that the Father life would meet my need, and I would find the right accommodations somewhere. My mother, although furious with my seemingly big-headed attitudes, was nonetheless torn with her feelings of love and compassion for my emaciated condition. She rejected everything I appeared to stand for: rebelliousness, contempt for the Jewish religion, high-handed attitudes toward authority, my self-will and arrogance. But she still loved me and was deeply afraid that I would eventually land up in greater trouble than I had ever thought possible. She admonished my brothers, telling them to hold their noisy arguments and turn to me. "You can stay here until you are better," she said. "Perhaps while you're here I can talk some sense into you. I can tell you now, if you go out into the streets and begin talking as you have to me, you will end up in even worse state than ever. Good people will spit and throw their rotten rubbish over you. You are a disgrace to your family." So, despite her anger, I laughed and thanked her, and kissed her warmly. Gladly, I remained with her, knowing very well that underneath her anger, she was deeply anxious for me. She fed me well and made me good new clothes. I appreciated all she did toward improving my appearance, as I knew that to move freely between rich and poor, I must be acceptably clad in decent garments. At times there were food shortages in the home. Drawing upon the power of my Father, I replenished them, saying nothing. Neither did she. I knew she wondered sadly whether, to all my other bad habits, I had now added that of thief. Then she caught me with a freshly baked loaf in my hands, and knew that I had not been out of the house to buy it, and neither had the stove been in use that day. She said nothing, but gave me a long, pondering look. I could see her attitudes change at that moment. She was no longer sure of her ground. She was beginning to question her own attitudes toward me, and also the truth of my statements. What really happened to him out in the desert? How could he make a loaf of bread without fire, flour, and yeast? What does it mean? Is he the Messiah? Then my brother cut his hand. He was in much pain when it festered. He allowed me to put my hands on his wound and quietly pray. I could see that he felt the power flow into his hands because he looked at me strangely. "The pain is gone," he said briefly. He was surly as he walked away, and I knew that while he was relieved to be free of pain, he did not like me for having been able to help him. I sensed his jealousy. My sister scalded her hand, and another brother often complained of bad headaches. I was able to cure them both. My brothers and sisters began to joke about my magic powers. They questioned what evil I might do to them if they angered me. The tension in the home deepened, and I felt sadness for my mother, who longed for peace in the house. But she saw changes in my behavior and was comforted. I was quieter, visibly controlled likely outbursts, reined in my energy, curbed impatience, no longer argued. I became more caring, listened to her womanly grumbles, helped her in the house by repairing broken furniture, and walked the hills to distant farms to find the fruits and vegetables she wanted. I came to love her tenderly and compassionately, as a mother should be loved. One day she ventured to ask me, "Do you still say that Jehovah is a myth?" Job said that if Jehovah were to withdraw his breath, all flesh would collapse together. That is the Jehovah I believe in and saw. No one has seen Jehovah, she said firmly. I saw that which has brought all things into being, I replied quietly. I call it the Father, because it is perfect love, love more perfect than a mother's, I added, smiling at her. It works in, through, and for all its creation. It is the Father in me which has brought you the things you needed in the house and healed my brothers and sisters so swiftly. I could see she was beginning to understand a little of what I said. What of sin? She asked. There is no sin as we understand it. We are born to behave as we do. We have to find a way to overcome our human thoughts and feelings, for they separate us from the protection of the Father and bring us sickness and misery. When we have learned how to overcome the self, we will enter the kingdom of heaven. My mother turned away silently, obviously pondering what I had said to her, but no longer angry. I knew she was thinking about my statements and realized they would be turning her safe and well-known world upside down. Without her belief in a Jehovah threatening dire vengeance if mankind was unruly, she would feel lost and insecure. She would wonder how the world would ever manage if it was left entirely to men to control the evil doings of themselves and others. Even kings and governors were wicked in their actions. Without Jehovah to rule and punish sinners, where would it end? While regaining my strength, I studied the Scriptures diligently to enable me to meet the Pharisees and the scribes with confidence. It was also imperative I should know what had been written of the Messiah, because I was convinced I was he of whom the prophets had spoken. I could indeed rescue, save people from misery, sickness, and poverty, even restore them to health and prosperity by showing them the truth concerning the kingdom of heaven and the reality of the Father. When I felt I was sufficiently prepared to go out and teach and heal, to please my mother, I agreed to go one Sabbath to the synagogue in Nazareth to speak to the congregation. As was customary, I stood up and was handed Isaiah to read. I chose the passage prophesying a Messiah would come, who would release the Jews from every type of bondage. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then I sat down, saying, Today you have seen this prophecy fulfilled in me. There was shock and amazement on the men's faces, but I continued to speak, knowing that the Father would tell me what to say. The words came without hesitation. I spoke about my experience in the desert and related my vision of the baby growing into manhood, all the while, all unknowingly, wrapping himself around with mental thongs and chains, thus blinding and imprisoning himself in interior darkness and shutting himself off from God. I explained that in so doing they exposed themselves to oppression from conquerors, slavery, poverty, and disease. For God is light, I said, and light is the substance of all visible thing, and light is love, which makes all things for man to enjoy. All blessings of abundance and health were freely available to him who loved God with mind, heart, and soul, and lived strictly according to the laws of God. When I had finished, there was complete silence in the synagogue. I felt that the congregation had experienced something strange and powerful, and had been lifted to a higher plane of thought, and wanted nothing to disturb the transcendent tranquility of that moment. Then the whispering started amongst themselves. They were wondering who I was. Some were convinced that I was the person Jesus, whose family was known in the village, but others could not accept this since I had spoken as one having authority. Unfortunately, I felt my old reactions to these religious men returning. I knew they had despised me in the past, and so I expected rejection. I slipped back into my old challenging attitudes and thoroughly angered them. Through my own human reactions, I invited disaster, and disaster I almost got. The younger men, urged on by their elders, rushed at me and dragged me to the highest cliff top to hurl me to my death. But I prayed to my Father for deliverance. Suddenly it seemed they were so stirred up they hardly knew what they were doing, and turned on each other. I was able to slip from their midst and escape. It was strange. They seemed not to notice my going. Badly shaken by my experience, I managed to send a message to my mother, saying I was leaving Nazareth immediately and going down to Capernaum, a gracious town by the Sea of Galilee.